tonight we've been kindly sponsored by Cloudflare. John's going to be talking a lot more about them during his presentation. And they've supplied the beer and pizza for tonight, so that's very kind of them. It's popular. I'll give that a second. Next month, we've got one talk lined up already. We've got, Siobhan McComb, and she's going to be talking about contributing to WordPress. We do have another space for another speaker, so if anyone's interested, please do contact me. And RSVPs for next month are open right now if anyone wants to RSVP. Just a few thank yous. Thanks to Google Campus. They give us this venue for free, which is great because they don't have money. Cloudflare for providing the beer and pizza. Robin Graham for their help with the cameras, James for his general support today, and of course Laura and John for talking tonight. So without any further ado, please give a warm welcome to Laura Kalbag.
Okay, hopefully my clicker will work. I had it yesterday and it was going a bit slowly, so I might abandon it midway. So I'm going to talk about designing WordPress admin icons, and this is a bit risky, I guess, because I'm going to do a little talk about icons and WordPress admin icons, and then I'm going to try and do some live designing of an admin icon. And so if you guys can get in your head any particular icon you think would be quite cool for me to design, because I haven't actually pre-planned this. So if there's any particular thing, if you've got an idea for a custom post type or a plugin that could do with an icon, I'm thinking relatively simple, otherwise we'll be here all night. But yeah, I mean, I guess I could always say no. Otherwise I might just end up duplicating one that already exists. So, icons. Why do we even use icons? So John Hick's book, The Icon Handbook, which is an amazing book, and you should get it if you're interested in icon design, says we just use them to inform, translate, and warn. And that actually covers such a huge amount of different things. We use them as navigation. We use them for shorthand. We use them to show status. We use them for emotions. We use them for instructions. We use them for actions. And actually on the web, all of these things kind of tend to fall under smaller categories. So we actually, when we're using the web and with computers and sort of tech in general, I mean, there are signs covered in icons everywhere. There's iconography used absolutely everywhere, all over the world. But particularly to us, we're probably more likely to come across them as favicons. And for this, when I'm using little tiny icons, I've blown them up. So they might not look terribly pretty, but at least you can see a bit easier what they are. Pictograms and app icons. So what actually makes icons good? What makes them effective? What makes them usable? Well, actually, no icon stands alone. The quality of a good icon is an icon as part of a set. You never have an icon that stands alone. It tends to mean nothing in that context. You very rarely use one on their own. I mean, even if you think about app icons, which you might think, well, that stands alone, that's just one icon. Well, no, because an app icon has to sit within the context of the entire doc. It still has to feel like it fits into the system. And so I think the quality of a really good icon is an icon that has consistency with the rest of the set. And so what things are we looking at when we're thinking about consistency? What elements need to be consistent? Come on. Right. So the size. So icons need to be a very similar size. They're very jarring if you suddenly come across a giant icon next to a small one. The color. The style. So when I say style, I'm talking about the strength of the lines, the thickness of the lines. Does it have an outline? Is it dark? Is it light? Because that's the thing that contains the whole icon. The light. Now this is very important. If there's shadowing on an icon, there's an implied light source, an implied direction that the light's coming from. And so you want all of your icons in the set to feel like they've got the same light source, unless you're doing some sort of crazy disco icons, I guess. And the angle. So is your icon at some sort of isometric angle? Is it tilted? Is it flat face on? Is it 3D? Is it 2D? And all of these different considerations, you just want to make sure that they're consistent. So, WordPress admin icons. I'd say that they are navigation icons. They're really a type of pictogram. It's a device that's used to distinguish between this long list of items. So in a way, they stand alone when you've got the navigation minimized to just icon view. And if you look at, this is navigation from my site, that would be quite useless if I minimized, because I've got projects, slides, and videos are all custom post types, and I've just left them with a standard icon. So that's fairly useless. I should probably do custom icons for those. But they break up that really long list, which if you've got tons of plugins that have their own menus, if you've got tons of custom post types, you really need those little visual indicators to help you distinguish between the things in the list. So I'm going to dissect the icons themselves. What actually makes up these icons? So how can we work out to design ones that fit with the rest of the set? So if we look at these icons, they're mostly one color. There are a few where there might be 2 items in there. And so there there's a couple of colors in there, but mostly they're one color. They're slightly muted colors. They have a very solid 1 pixel outline. They're not angled at all. They're flat, face on, 2D. They might have a slight suggestion of 3D in them through a gradient that gives a sort of bubble-like effect. There's the light source from the top. So the light source at the top, it creates this white highlight that shows often on the top or the points that might stick out on an icon. And then the shadow at the bottom is just a single line showing the shadow. And the shadow is, of course, darker where the icon touches the line, and lighter where it's further away. There's very minimal detail because these are very small icons, so it's very hard to distinguish details, so there'd be no point doing them. And when there are more than one object, they're overlapped. The 3D isn't necessarily shown. So here it's very hard to see how deep that camera is. There's not really any suggestion of depth. There's just a musical note right behind it. And when you overlap 2 icons, you have them set apart from each other. So they're slightly, one's further up, one's further down, one's to the left, one's to the right. And this is consistent with the music icons, with the user icons, with the keys, with all the ones where you're using multiple objects. So these are all the things that we need to bear in mind when we're designing icons that we want to fit in with this. We need to replicate those concepts and those techniques to make sure that it feels consistent with the rest of the set. So when you're making your admin icons, what do you need to make? Because it's not just simple as one icon. First of all, we have the 28 pixel grayscale icon on a transparent background. And it's actually mostly shown on a grey background. And so we need to bear that in mind, but actually it's a transparent PNG. And so this is what comes up right here on the posts. And you can see I've zoomed in a bit closer there. And that's that grayscale. But then when you hover over that part of the menu, or if you click it and it's active, you get the color version of the icon. So that's now 2 icons we need to design. And then if you actually go onto the admin page, well then you've got the large version of the icon. Slightly more detail, 32 pixels, but that's just grayscale. There's no color version. It doesn't do anything if you hover over it. So now we've got 3 versions. So that's 3 icons we need to design. But then there's the blue theme. And I don't know if most of you have forgotten about the blue theme. If you go into your user settings, you have the option of turning your WordPress admin into corporate admin, I think it is. It's that weird blue tint. And if you want to accommodate the people that might have the corporate admin look, then you're going to need to design the icons for that as well, because they don't actually have grayscale icons. They have icons with a blue tint. So then for the menus on here, you need to do the 28 pixel icon with a blue tint. And then when you get into the main screen, you've got to do a version of the 32 pixel icon with a blue tint. So altogether, that makes the 28 pixel grey icon, the 28 pixel colour icon, the 32 pixel grayscale icon, the 28 pixel blue tint icon, the 32 pixel blue tint icon. So that's a lot of versions of one icon. And then we get the high DPI, or retina display, I guess you call it if you're being Apple specific. And if you want to accommodate those users, which WordPress admin does by default now include high DPI icons, we've got to do that as well. So then we've got 28 pixel color, 32 pixel grayscale, 28 pixel blue tint, 32 pixel blue tint, and the 56 pixel grayscale, so double the 28, 56 pixel color, 64 pixel grayscale, double the 32, 56 pixel blue tint, and 64 pixel blue tint icon. And that's a lot of icons to design, all essentially one similar thing. So particularly in this case, and actually in all cases, whenever I design admin icons, I say, now, if you're going to use the blue admin, that's your problem. I'm actually just going to do it specific. If you're doing a really like professional custom theme or a plugin, then you probably will want to consider all of them. But I don't know many people that use the blue admin. Most people I know that use them tend to be developers that have a dev version of a site and a live version of the site, and they use the blue admin and the grey admin to distinguish between the two, which is quite clever. So I don't worry too much about that. So for this icon design tonight, we want to make the 28 pixel grayscale, the 28 pixel color icon, the 32 pixel grayscale, and the double versions as well. So, time to get going. And this is where I need to make sure that I'm mirroring my screen. That all works. Oh, let's change the settings again. Sorry, bear with me a second. I just need to make it nice and big. Yeah, that on the right. Sorry, I didn't realise when I unplugged it that it was going to forget everything I told it before. Come on. So the app I'm going to be using for designing these icons, I'm on a Mac, so I'm using a Mac app. It's not a very well-known app. It's called Sketch. If you happen to follow me on Twitter, you probably know about it because I go on about it all the time. It's a really good, really affordable app, very affordable compared to Photoshop, which I think is horrendously overpriced. And it's a vector-based app, which is really handy when you're doing icons. Projector hates me. So I might have to make it really dinky. See if that works. Is that proportional? No.
Did you not set the resolution on color LCD separately as well?
Oh yeah. Oh yes, you're right. You got it. That's the problem. Thank you. That one, or is it that one? Yeah, that'll do. Right. So, this app is called Sketch. I'm on the beta version of Sketch. So if you look here, it has a really delightful warning saying warning, these builds are betas. And actually, there is quite a high chance this version that I'm using today, because it's pretty much a daily build, has been quite crashy. So if it crashes, do bear with me. But it is an amazing app. I love it. It's really good because what it does is, it's a very modern design app. It's really optimized for designing for the web and designing for apps. And so you can export in really all useful formats. You can export in SVG, you can export in PNG, you can export all your artboards at once. It's brilliant for that. So when I'm going to start out designing an icon, I always have the default icons sitting there on the screen the whole time. So I've got something to check against, to check that my icon is looking similar or fitting in with the rest of those. Sorry, just get my notes out. And before I even get into that, I need to come up with some ideas. So did anyone think of any particular icon? Go for it.
Events and testimonials.
Oh, okay. Events and testimonials.
Just one, choose one.
Let's pick one then. Okay. Events? Yeah. So what would you do for events then? Should we, I guess probably some sort of calendar is probably the most common thing to do. And so what I'd then do is you'd be like, right, what does a calendar look like? So I'm going to pinch this pen here because it's nice and fat. So maybe I just draw out a really rough idea of what I think a calendar might look like. There you go, my artistic prowess. So it's probably full width at the top, isn't it? This is probably red. It's got a big number in there. You know, I guess if we open up the dock, we can have a look at. Yeah, that's quite similar. So maybe we have those kind of little ring things that Apple has on their one. That's fairly standard. You kind of see it. Oh no, don't open it. Don't need that. Right, and yeah, so that's nice and straightforward. And we want the flat-on view. So if you look at the Apple's one, theirs is slightly tilted. It's actually not only tilted slightly in that direction, it's also tilted slightly back, and that's where you can see the underside of the pages. But because we're following the same pattern as the rest of the standard admin icons, we're not going to be able to see the bottom because we're doing flat-on. So it's quite a nice, simple shape. Right. So I have these all up at the, hello, recognise my mouse. So I have these all up on the screen at the same time. Now I've actually made little mini artboards that I could put my icons in because these are the sizes that they're pulled up in the CSS. So that's the 28 pixels. And while the square is actually 28 pixels, if you look at the icons above, they're quite a bit smaller. They're actually nearer to 16 pixels. Some of the funkier shaped icons do jump out of that a little bit, which I think is one of the reasons why there's a nice big space around it. But generally we're sticking to around 16 pixels. And so if you look here, my mouse is big enough, I've actually drawn little guidelines in to show me roughly where those 16 pixels are. And I'm going to do it in place right next to the icons, because that's a really good way I can compare the scale exactly. So I tend to go for the color version first, because once I've done the color version, it's very easy to make it grayscale. If I do the grayscale version first, it's not hard to make it color, but it's a bit trickier. So I will zoom right in. So nice slow slide scroll going on there. So I'll just start with some shapes. Now I'm working in vector, but the benefit of using sketches, when I zoom in really far, maybe you can make that out, you can actually see the pixels, which is quite unusual for a vector program. If you're using Illustrator and you zoomed in, you wouldn't see pixels. It would just be whole vectors forever. And that's quite a good way of seeing. But one thing to say is with icons, you don't, even though you're creating them in vector, they don't tend to scale very well. Because what you design that works really well at a small size, if you blow it up, it will look very simple. It won't look very detailed. If you took a really big icon, like a really nice detailed app icon and shrunk it right down, it would just look like a little mess and you couldn't distinguish all the different parts. So when we're doing these icons, we need to think about keeping it simple. So, rectangle. Do you know what? I'm going to cheat and I'm going to bring the dock up so I could just have a little look at the calendar icon in the corner and use that as my inspiration. So if I look at the other square icons, how big are they? So you've got the system preferences, the settings one here. So I'm actually going to make it so it's roughly the same size as that. It won't be quite as tall. So I've got a nice little shape there. I'm going to pop it back in my square and center it. Right, so that's the start. If I look at the rest of the icons, none of them have white backgrounds. They're kind of slightly off-white. So maybe I'll go for a slightly off-white background as well. So if I look at the pages icon, that's quite yellowy. I mean, I don't want they look like they're quite aged. I don't really want my calendars to look aged. So maybe because the top of the calendar is going to be red, I'll give it a slight pinky feel. So I'm just going to pick a slightly pinky colour. I might change it a bit later. And then the outline. If I look at the other things, I think it's got to be a really strong outline. And none of them really have grey outlines, the coloured icons. So I think I'm going to do what the user icons are. And you see it's got that red, so it's got that really dark red. So I'm just going to pinch the colour off that for now. It might not look great later. We'll see how it goes. So there we go. And so for the top of my icon, zoom it in. Oop. I would just draw another little rectangle at the top for the red part. Not sure, is that taller? I might make it a little bit taller than that. Okay. And this is going to be properly red. And so I'm actually going to pinch some of the muted red from the user icon because that will tie it in nicely. I might need to make it a little bit darker than that. And the border. The great thing about Sketch is it actually corresponds with CSS quite nicely. So a lot of the tools mimic borders and things in the same style that you'd use in CSS. Well, that's getting there. It's very simple at the moment. It might be a little bit dark, those outlines, so I might need to work on those in a minute. Do the little rings for the top. Might not be tall enough. I'll make it a little bit higher up like that. So I want them to be about the same height, so it doesn't, I mean, they are stacked one on top of the other, so the height consistency isn't quite as important as having consistent width. I'll just do that, just a time check. Now, is there any grey? There's not really any grey. I'd say that grey was kind of, it looks metally. Maybe I'll go for gold, like the keys. That would match quite well. Oh, I picked the right. I can't see the fill colour because the border's covering it up. Doesn't help. So I'll make that border on the outside so it doesn't cover it up. Now that's looking a bit chunky. And it's quite strange like that, so I'll make it a bit narrower. Yeah. And pick the colours from there. Just duplicate that object quickly. There we are. Calendar's starting to take shape. It doesn't look quite right yet. But the good trick is actually just to zoom out and see if it looks any better when it's zoomed out. See what stands out at that point, because no one's going to be looking at the icons when they're up that close. But they will be looking at the icons, and that's a 100% zoom. And so I'd say at the moment, I think that maybe the border stands out a little bit too much. And yet the rings at the top are a little bit light. They're not very high contrast compared to the rest. So I'll just work on making those rings a little bit darker in the border. Pick a slightly darker yellow colour. It doesn't help that I can't see when it's selected. And make this border just a little bit lighter. So it fits in a bit better. brilliant thing is it's chosen something that's square, which inevitably makes it much easier with the pixels. I think, okay, so it looks like it's a little bit high up compared to the rest of the icons. Like it looks like it's floating a bit more, and I think that's because we're missing the shadow underneath, which a lot of the other icons have. So if I stick the shadow in there, it might look a bit better. And the shadow is really easy, I guess, because the entirety of the calendar is exactly the same distance from the ground at the entire width of the shadow. So it's going to be that same darkness. So if I just quickly draw a rectangle in, and because it's a shadow, I'm going to make it black, which might seem strange, but it's actually, because it's a transparent PNG, it will take, if I make this black, then a varying level of opacity, the color that will be behind the icon will show through, and so that will work with the shadow to make it look a bit more realistic. And I'm going to just scroll along and have a look at the other shadows. Really, looking at that settings shadow, that's not quite right, is it? Because that's exactly the same distance from the floor the whole way along, and yet it's much lighter at the edges than it is in the middle. They're very nice icons, I can't really focus. But then if I look at that, I need to, stay still. I need to compare, so that's the point at which it's closest. So really I want my shadow to be about the same level of opacity as that part of the shadow to keep it consistent.
Do you think they were going for a very strong point light source? That might explain the fall off. Possibly.
I don't think it would. I don't think a shadow would ever look like that. So no. I wouldn't speak that rudely to any of the rest of you, I'm sorry. You are allowed to make comments and ask questions throughout. I won't be that horrible. Do feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions as well. So it's 25%, maybe a little bit darker than that. About 27%. That looking a bit more consistent. I zoom out, is that 100%? Yeah, that's 100%. Actually, that's starting to look a bit more consistent. Now I think we need to work on the rest of the light source. So we've got the shadow in there, but we haven't got the highlight that the rest of the icons have. That kind of little bright spot at the top. And I guess, now usually I'd say that would just apply to the top of the icon, like the way that light works, it would bounce onto the top. But then actually, if you look at some of the other icons, they use it in different places too. So there's actually white around the bottom of the camera here. There's white all the way around the page. So we've got a bit of creative license with that, I reckon. So it's almost used as a border, I guess, in a way. So I'm going to use an inner shadow on this. I'm going to make it white. And at the moment it's not showing up. Oh, it is, it's just very light. So that's starting to look about a bit better. It's quite subtle. I think if I make the angle a bit better. So there, that's wrong because it's whiter at the bottom than it is at the top. And because the shadow's at the bottom, the light needs to be at the top. So if I switch it the other way around, and I'll make it a little bit more subtle. So at the moment that's full white. Make that slightly better opacity there. I don't think I want it to be quite as extreme as it is on the settings switch. I think that stands out quite a lot. And I think that actually stands out too much compared to the other ones. So I think I'll keep it about that.
Isn't the idea though with the switch that it's slightly raised up like a light switch?
I guess, yeah, it's more of a beveled edge to it. Yeah, that possibly, yeah. And actually, I guess that then we want to really emulate that on the top part, on the red part, because that would be the part that would have more of a beveling to it. The paper wouldn't be beveled. I'm going to cheat, and actually no, if I copy the style, that will make the whole thing wrong. So back to my inner shadow. Nice white shadow. To keep clicking on and off to let myself. I'll zoom in. Wait. Selecting boxes in the way. Usually I just I'm not very good at the maths, so I'm not very good at like X and Y axis and things like that. I tend to just fiddle with it until it looks right. I mean, I know what the Y axis and the X axis are, but how it actually works shows up on the icon. It's so this is why I'm not really explaining it, because if I do, I'll explain it very badly and I'll probably leave everyone far more confused than they were in the first place. How's that? Is that too strong? I guess we'll have to zoom out to see. I think that's okay. I don't know. Maybe a little bit stronger. That's not looking too bad. And then on the rings as well, we want to, I think that they might need a little bit more. I know I toned down the contrast on those, but I think they need a little bit more contrast on there, a bit more warmth and colour. Just copy the hex across so I get them exactly the same. And give those that's very light, and exactly the same on both of them. Starting to fit in quite well. It's quite difficult being placed next to the keys there, because I think the keys have a very light outline compared to when you look at the other ones. So I think it does look quite dark in contrast. I'll try and, you know. So now we need to do the number. I never know which number to pick when I'm doing calendar icon. Do you just pick a random? Sorry?
32.
32. That might actually be more confusing though.
17th today?
Yeah, we'll do 17th then. That's nice and easy. So what I'm actually just going to pick a.
Struggle to fit 2 digits into that space.
I think we might, if we don't. Oh, there we go. Right. So let's do that in. It won't work at the moment if I. Oh, it renders that. Not too bad. It hints it and everything. I'm quite pleased with that. I didn't know it would be that good. I was then going to go, well, let's look at pixel fonts and see if that could make it easier to read. Well, we'll see how easy it is to read. About 100%? Yeah. Yes, it's a bit dark, a bit big. I think it needs a bit more space around the numbers to give them a bit more clarity.
7's a bit indistinct as well as a number, isn't it?
That's true. Well, the Apple Calendar's clever. It adjusts the icon to match the date. We could try a different number. I mean, maybe something like 30 has got lots of round shapes in, so that might be easier. Although the problem with very small sizes, the round shapes can render it not as clearly, so that might work.
Wouldn't it be logical to use a single digit because then you can make it larger?
Well, I mean, yeah, you could make it bigger, but the problem is that you can't make it any taller, and so you might just end up stretching it.
But you can use a different line so that it could work.
Yeah, I guess I could, but then if you think about calendars and the single digits do tend to be the same size as the other ones, so you have to allow for the space. If I just make the font size that little bit smaller, I think I might have to go down to 8 because the box itself is an even width of pixels, and we want to have the same space of pixels around the outside of the numbers. So the size of the font will need to be even as well. Now that's starting to look very tiny. I think we might have to give that some help. So I shuffle that along. Oh, you know what? I said that about the even amount of pixels, and the hinting means it doesn't quite work like that. Thank you, hinting. Let's have a look. Zoom out again. Okay, it's constantly zooming in and out. Right, I think we're getting there. It's not great. I think we're getting there. And when I get to this point, this is when I start getting fussy with the pixels. And so I think, well, how can I make that 30 clearer? Trying a million different fonts probably isn't going to make a difference at that size. They're all going to render fairly poorly. So this is the point at which I start getting picky, and I look at these shapes and I'm like, right, well, I want to make a clearer separation between the 3 and the 0, because at the moment, the way that the hinting is muddying it is making it much harder to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to draw a line over the top, and I make it the same colour as the background. Oh, which is like that. Oh, it's not working. Ah, border. Confusing. Right, so that's the same colour as the background. Now when I deselect that, zoom out, it might look a bit too...
Looks like a D.
Yeah. So we need to go about halfway, I reckon. So if we make that slightly more transparent, so we're still making it a little bit clearer, but letting it have that roundness. It's sort of a bit. 1 and 8. We give that a go.
Just one number.
Okay. Well, for the sake of not being here forever, I guess. what one number? 9.
Wasn't it clearly a calendar before the numbers? Anyway. Maybe that's just me, but...
Well, yeah.
We were talking about the fact that it is a calendar.
And that's the thing you would, yeah. That's why it's always good to go and ask someone random, what do you think this is? Oh, that's quite a nice idea, a little detail of the shape. Should we try it? Well, yeah, we could try that. I can do it really crudely at first. We need them, I mean, it's not going to be realistic because I don't think we could fit 7 columns in there very easily. So we should kind of work out. That's a bit annoying, isn't it? What's that? 4. That's not too bad.
Looks like a car battery now.
It's also like just playing around and seeing how it works. I don't know if... So we haven't got very much space to play with. It's quite, I'm trying to tell whether it's it looks clearer on my screen, but I think that's because this is slightly fuzzier, but I'm not sure that's really distinguishable enough. No, I think numbers are probably better. Though, when we work up to the next version, so when we're scaling up to the 32 pixel version that we use on the main screen, that's the point at which we might want to start adding these kind of details, and they'll work a lot better because you've got that bit more space to play with. Let's bring our 30 back. Now I know that I'm going to run out of time eventually. So if I see that there, what colour? It's not perfect, but we'll just quickly go into the grayscale version now. So I'll take the whole lot and I'll just copy it. and put it in place. The trick now is softening it, because the grayscale version is actually a lot softer than the color version. The color version has to stand out against when you've selected that menu item, it has that dark grey background. And so the color version has to have a much darker outline to stand out really well against that dark grey. Whereas the grey version is shown on a light grey background, so it doesn't need quite as high a contrast. So we can go with a lot more subtle greys and things in this. So what I tend to do is I tend to just drag from where the colour is in the spectrum, and I just go to the grey point. And then actually it needs to be a bit lighter than that, because if you look at the hard edges of the user icon, that's quite dark, but it's not quite as dark as the calendar, so about there. Shadow can stay the same because that's always grayscale anyway. I might make the border on the top a little darker to emphasize it. I make these little details, so maybe slightly lighter. And I just go through and just making everything grey and just trying to blend it so that it works with the other ones. If you were doing the blue tint version, you'd be doing the same thing, but just then making it all into blue. So you're doing effectively what you would do with grey. You're taking the colour out and you're just putting a blue tint on top of it. Because while it's blue, it's not different shades of blue. It's all just one variation of that horrible corporate blue. Oh, just in the colour one by accident. I think it might be a little bit dark. Have a look when I zoom out. You see, it's a little bit, that line just there is a lot darker than all of the other lines, I think, so I'll just make that slightly lighter. And so then when I want to scale up to these super big ones, I'd copy it again, go into that layer. Oh, inaccurate controls. Sketch is great and they add things very regularly, but occasionally it can do some slightly wonky things. And this is one of them. When you resize, it might go a bit wonky. Oh yeah. All right. That's not too bad. No, it can go all over the place. Still got a tiny 30, but that's just preserved the font size. The shadow looks a bit terrible because actually, even though it's bigger, the shadow is still only 1 pixel high on all of these ones. It's exactly the same. So we should keep that the same. 1 pixel high as well. Yeah. But then it was at this point, maybe make it lighter still, because again, the level of detail and the size, we can take the contrast down, we can add more detail in, we can start putting all of the different, we could put those little date lines and things in. We might want to take out the number. The benefit is that this icon doesn't have to be completely identical to the icon in the menu. As long as it's similar enough, you've got that consistency. But it doesn't need to be identical, because you can put all the more detail in. You can see that on the cog it's got that nice sort of a level of light and things like that. All of the different ones have gone into, particularly with light and the shadow, you can see stronger lines in the gradients and things like that. And so just before I finish, I want to show you the wonder of Sketch, because I told you that we had to do 2 versions of all of these icons in order to make them work for high DPI displays. But the brilliant thing about Sketch is we don't have to do that, because you've done it all in vector, and so it can scale it up automatically. So if we go to export, don't create slices. And so we want to export it at, it'll be 28 pixels. I'll pretend that the guideline isn't there at the moment. 28 pixels. Ooh, easier in there. And then all I have to do when I want to export it to the for high DPI is just select export at 2x version, and it will automatically pull out a double-size version. That won't be perfect. I mean, that will just be your double everything scaled up. If you want to get really particular and really perfectionist about it, you could scale that up by hand. You could make sure, if you actually look at the WordPress version, am I opening? It's not on this one, but the ones that the WordPress admin icons they've done, when they've scaled them up, they've kept 1 pixel borders. So they've doubled everything, but they've still kept those really fine borders and things like that. So it has an extra crispness to it because you can see that much more detail on the high DPI screen. But what you've got to question is it actually worth it? Because the percentage of users that are doing that, I mean, I'm not sure how many people are really using the WordPress admin on their iPhones. It's not exactly the easiest thing to browse. Maybe when they start introducing a slightly more responsive design down to that size, I don't know whether that's something that's realistic, really. And so then you're maybe accommodating the people that are wealthy enough to have high DPI monitors or MacBook Pros. So that's a fairly small percentage of people. And the people that are using maybe their iPads that have Retina displays, which again, I don't know, it's maybe worth checking on your site analytics to see the percentage of people and whether it's worth putting that much extra effort into it. So that was me. Oh, so she opening all the apps by accident. So clumsy. Right. I'll get back into this. And that's me. And if you ever want to chat about anything WordPressy or designy, I'm always on Twitter. Or app.net, same username on app.net. And if anyone has any questions, I think we have a few more minutes, don't we?
Yeah, let's do 5 minutes of questions.
5 minutes of questions. Okay. Hey.
Why did you start small and go big rather than go big and go small?
Because it's very you're quite ambitious when you do big. And so you tend to add in lots of detail and cool features and things like that. And then you get to the point where you go, how am I going to make it work like this in small? It's much easier actually to start conservatively and then add layer of detail on top of that. Which I guess is the way I develop things for the web. I'd start with the mobile version and sort of scale up. And so I take the same approach to icon design. Hello?
Would you do that for something like an iOS icon, which should go to like 512 by 512 and be really photorealistic maybe at that point? Would you again start from small and go big?
Yes, I think I would. I think I would. I mean, it's probably sensible to start at the resolution it's most likely to be seen at. So the resolution that it's most likely to be used, the one that's going to be representing, if it's something like an app, then the one that's going to be most representative of the app is probably the best one to start with and then scale up and down from there. But generally, I think it's easier to start simple and add it all on. Cool. Weird. More drinks? Right, thank you.